Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Ibarra, a Business Services Manager for Caltrans District 11. Thank you for joining us in District 11's How to Do Business 2.0 series, and today's presentation will be focusing on the topic of prompt payment. For this prompt payment presentation, we have the pleasure of having the subject matter expertise from Margie Perez, the Acting District Division Chief of Construction. We have Dave Pound, Office Chief of Construction Engineering in Office B, Monica Coralejo, Labor Compliance Manager, Tamara Gelinas, Regional Office Manager for Granite Construction and AGC Prime. She oversees their finance department to help facilitate and maintain the financial health of her region. And now that you know who we expect to hear from today, I would like to introduce Amar Bata, the Deputy District Director of Construction and Land Surveys here at District 11, who will begin our event with a welcome message. Hi, Amar, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Maria. Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for giving me this opportunity to say a few words today. I'm excited to welcome you all to the second session of District 11 How to Do Business with Caltrans 2.0 series. As Maria had mentioned, today's session will be focusing specifically on prompt pay. The How to Do Business with Caltrans series was developed in response to a survey conducted by the District 11 Small Business Team. This survey was filled out by small businesses such as yourselves during an event just like today's. The topic prompt pay is a constant topic that is mentioned at the district local small business council meetings. In response to this, we developed a team to collaborate on how we can address this concern. What this signifies is the importance of your input and how much Caltrans value your feedback. On March 3rd of this year, Caltrans Director Tax Mushakan announced the official launch of the 2024 Caltrans Strategic Plan, which includes an equity statement with action plans to achieve what we call commitment on the 4 Ps, which are people, programs and projects, partnership, and planning. You all, as the people of this community, we want you to know that your input serves a vital role in Caltrans' mission to provide a safe and reliable transportation network that serves all people and respects the environment. Caltrans is striving to eliminate barriers and work towards a more equitable transportation network. These efforts can only be possible through collaboration and deep engagement with our communities. Through the participation and commitment of individuals and organizations in District 11 Small Business Council, in addition to our external partners that includes the Association of General Contractors, the AGC of America, the San Diego chapter, we were able to help address concerns surrounding prompt pay through the development of this training. As Maria had mentioned, we have the pleasure of having subject matter experts from the District 11 Division of Construction, which includes labor compliance, and a prime contractor guest speaker from the San Diego AGC. Our presenters' objectives will focus on explaining what exactly prompt pay is, where you can find information, what the process is, what can delay payment, and what the contractor responsibilities to achieve timely payment. We will also have the opportunity to hear from one of the AGC primes, Granite Construction. Granite will talk about the best tips to receive payment promptly, which includes a subcontractor checklist that primes with the AGC were able to develop specifically for today's presentation. Now, without further delay, I'd like to bring Maria Ibarra back to talk to us about what prompt pay is. Maria?
Thank you, Amer. Let's get started by tackling our first objective by identifying what is prompt payment. So in order to understand prompt payment, we can look in the Government Code Chapter 4.5, also known as the Prompt Payment Act. So according to this section, the intent of the legislature is that state agencies pay properly submitted undisputed invoices, refunds, or other undisputed payments due to individuals within 45 days of receipt or notification. Otherwise, automatically calculate and pay the appropriate late payment penalties as specified in this chapter. According to the Public Contract Code 10262.5, a prime contractor or subcontractor shall pay to any subcontractor no later than 7 days after receipt of each progress payment, so that the respective amounts allow the contractor on account of the work performed by the subcontractors, to the extent of each subcontractor's interest therein. So where can you find the related information? As a contractor on Caltrans construction contract, you should be aware of the construction standard specifications. The Office of Construction Standards develops and revises construction contract standards that include the standard specifications, standard plans, and standard special provisions, or SSPs, standard item codes, bid book, and the notice to bidders. The standard specs are updated every 5 years. So for your convenience, the most up-to-date standard specifications, including up-to-date revisions, can be viewed within the Caltrans Contractors Corner website, as listed on the slide. So the link is shown towards the bottom of this slide. I would encourage you to bookmark this page on your computer or make it your favorite. Keep in mind that this presentation is specifically for subcontractors on Caltrans major construction projects. Other types of contracts, that is minor B and emergency work, may differ slightly. So as a prime or subcontractor, you should always refer to the contract provisions which are available for each contract. So to read further about the sections mentioned in the Public Contract Code, you can visit the California Legislative Information page, click on the California law, then click on Public Contract Code. This page will allow you to search the entire PCC via section number or by keywords. So now that you have some basics, where to look for prompt pay information, I'd like to introduce Margie Perez, Acting District Division Chief of Construction, to talk to us about the payment process. Welcome, Margie.
Thank you very much, Maria. Good morning, everyone. And yes, I'm actually going to be going through what is the payment process. And so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Maria, next slide, please. Thank you very much. And I just want to point out that there's a lot of information on this slide. And so I believe that you guys will be given a PDF version of this PowerPoint presentation. So what I'm going to be going through are really the highlights on each of these slides. And so with that, with the progress payments, it's also known as our monthly pay estimates. And it is an estimate because it's sometimes due to holidays and weekends. Caltrans will go through and estimate the work through and including the 20th. Now, one thing I'd like to point out is that the quantities given and paid for each month, it's really a collaborative effort. And it's important for the subs to know that they need to work through their primes to get their estimates and of the quantities to the RE with enough time for the RE to review and resolve any discrepancies. So that's next slide, please. And so that's taking care of the pay estimates for our regular bid items. Now, what happens if there's work that's outside of those contract bid items? We would go through and discuss our change order bills, which are also known as our extra work bills. Now, the standard spec does state that that separate records for CCO costs do need to be maintained, and bills need to be submitted using the Internet Extra Work Bill system. And with that, the link is actually given here on this slide. And I'd also like to point out that in order to use the system, the department does go ahead and provide training within 30 days of the request, and the contractor's representative will be assigned an account and a user ID after the training is complete. Also, by using this system, the contractor who submits the bill, as well as the RE that goes through and authorizes the bill, it's the same as if each party is signing the documents. So, thank you. Next slide. So, for the extra work bills that are paid, one thing I'd like to point out is that these are paid at the same time as the monthly pay estimate, and the paperwork does need to be submitted on the 15th of every month. Now, this is because the RE does need to review and approve the bills in the system prior to the estimate being processed. Now, for work that is done at force account, which is really time and material, backup documents such as invoices as well as the tentative agreements will be needed. Now, a bill may be rejected for any of the following reasons. There may be errors on the number of hours worked, the hourly rate, or the equipment code and rates are not correct. It could be the wrong CCO number, or backup documents such as the invoices as well as the tentative agreements do not match what's on the bill. Or it may be that the RE really does not believe that the extra work was constituted. Now, with that, we want to go ahead and make sure that that contractors are submitting them in a timely manner so that these conversations can happen and may be resolved prior to the estimate deadline. Now, a bill that has been rejected will need the contractor to correct the errors and then resubmit. Next slide, please. For materials on hand. Now, this is for materials that are purchased but have not yet been incorporated into the work. Now, the 2018 standard specs does list all of the materials that are eligible for materials on hand, or MOH, and they are no longer listed in the special provisions. Now, in order to qualify for payment under MOH, the material first must be purchased and need to have a copy of the invoice. Secondly, the materials must have been inspected and released in accordance with the contract. And the MOH form, the CEM 5101, needs to be submitted no later than 1 week before the end of the estimate period. So if the estimate period is on the 20th, ensure that by the 13th of each month or earlier, depending on the weekend and holiday, that the paperwork has been turned in. Now, most importantly, once the form has been submitted, a form must be submitted each month until the item is paid for, or the money will automatically be deducted from the progress payment. And the amount of the material cannot be more than the amount of the contract item for which it will be used, because usually the contract item does include the labor and equipment also. And lastly, do not include material that will be paid for as an item of work in the progress payment. Thank you. Next slide, Maria. Oh, and this goes through and completes the presentation of progress payments, and I can take any questions at this time.
Margie, it looks like we don't currently have any questions right now. We did have one asking about what the acronym RE is, so I don't know if there was any acronyms that we didn't address.
You know what, I do apologize for that. We are well known for using our acronyms. And RE is actually the resident engineer for the project.
I believe we do have one question from Rodney. Rodney, I didn't know if you wanted me to unmute you. Second. Yes, give me. Rodney, go ahead and you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you guys. I really appreciate this. This is really educational. Just to let you know, our company, we're a supplier, so we're a DBE and a SB supplier of electrical wire, fiber optic cable and conduit and associated materials. And we have participated on several Caltrans projects, just to let you know. We were really curious about this particular portion of the prompt payment because we, in the past, have been given that DBE F004 form after submitting, of course, our invoice. And just to let you know, on a couple of projects, it took longer than our 30 days of net to get our payment. And we were wondering why. We really couldn't get a fair answer from the electrical contractor. So how do that? We're just trying to figure out how do we fit into this whole process of getting prompt payment.
Rodney, thank you for the question. And I believe as we go through our presentation, there may be, for example, I believe Granite Construction as the prime is actually going to go ahead and list some items that as a prime they're going to be looking for you as a supplier and sub that you'll actually have to meet. And so they'll be going through several of that criteria for you. And if your criteria does not fit into one of those, we can also go ahead and address the question at that time.
Thank you, Margie. Thank you, Rodney. And I had one more question for you, Margie. It says, does the California Prompt Payment Act cover all state agencies?
I'm sorry, all what, Maisel?
All state agencies?
I believe so. I believe so. I don't think it goes through and specifies specific agencies.
Okay, thank you, Margie. Those are all the questions at this time. We will go ahead and move forward to our next section, and we'll have Dave Pound, Office Chief of Construction Engineering, Office B, District Office. He will be talking about what can delay a payment. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dave Pound, and I will talk about some of the reasons that some of your payments, some of the money due to you may be held up for a while, or in some cases, not paid at all. Next, yes. So there are two ways that money could be either held up temporarily or held up permanently. One is called a withhold, and one is called a deduction. Next, please. Okay, for a withhold, the contract has definitions in Section 1, and the contractual definition of a withhold is money temporarily or permanently taken from a progress payment. Now, the official definition does say that it's possibly permanent, but when we talk about withholds, we almost always talk about it being temporary. So Caltrans may withhold payment for non-compliant performance or non-compliant progress, such as, and here's some examples, and this is probably the most often used, is not submitting required documents on time, and that could be like a certified payroll, monthly CPM schedules, forms related to either DBE, DVBE, things like that. Other reasons that we might do a temporary withhold would be for not performing some required field work, and that might be safety items or work with respect to environmental compliance. Safety items might be traffic control items or something like that, signs, things like that, that are not compliant with the contract, and if the contractor doesn't do them in a reasonable amount of time, we may withhold that, a payment of some kind. And also environmental could be like stormwater BMPs, if they're not done correctly, and the engineer keeps telling the contractor to do it right and they don't do it right, we may do a temporary withhold on a payment. Also, non-compliant progress is a reason for a temporary withhold. And that is done where the work being done is not really keeping up with the contract time. And the contract actually has a formula where a temporary withhold can be taken, and depending on the percentage of work done versus the percentage of time that has passed. And we don't do this very often. It's quite rare, actually, but it is in the contract, and if the progress is not being made significantly behind schedule, we may be able to use this and take a temporary withhold. Also, stop notices. The department withholds payments to cover claims under the Civil Code, so that may be another reason that we withhold payment, at least temporarily. All right, next, please. All right, now a deduction is a permanent withhold. The contract defines deductions as money permanently taken from a progress payment or the final payment. So some examples of a deduction would be liquidated damages. That's when work continues on the contract past the number of working days. If all the working days have expired and there's still work going on, then we charge per calendar day a certain number of dollars per day until the work is done. Another example would be survey restaking. The contractor often requests surveys to put up staking. If those get damaged by the work of the contractor and they need to be restaked, we actually charge for that based on an hourly rate of the survey team. Occasionally, some material needs to be inspected that comes from out of state. If a Caltrans employee needs to travel out of state to inspect that material at the fabrication site, we actually charge for that. And again, there's sort of a formula for that to determine the actual number. In some cases, if there's non-compliance with a certain specification, a good example of that would be asphalt compaction. If it doesn't meet the contract requirements completely, but it's not so bad that we'd have to remove it, we could take a permanent deduction in that item payment. Another example would be recompensing Caltrans for payments of fines and damages levied by other governmental agencies or private lawsuits. An example of that might be if Caltrans got fined for not meeting some environmental commitments, we would pass that fine on to the contractor, and that would be a permanent deduction. And that's it. Next. Yeah, this is our chance for questions. Are there any questions?
Hi, Dave. It looks like they are letting you off easy. Oh, actually, you know what? I spoke too soon. All right, Omar, let me go ahead and unmute you. Give me one. All right, Omar, you're unmuted.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this very valuable presentation. I'm Omar from Blue Nose Construction, and I have a question. When you say deduction is permanently, and when we are having liquidated damages, we are taking more time, let's say, on a project. Do you mean we will not get the money permanently, or how does it work? I just need a justification on this, please. Thank you.
Okay, sir. So if work continues in the past when the working days expire, let's say it's a 100 working day project and it took you 120, it took you more than 100 days, and let's say it was 20 calendar days past the working days, we would multiply 20 days times a certain number, which is spelled out in the contract. And yes, that would be a permanent deduction. Now, it is possible that if you submit kind of a claim for that time, and you have a good justification of why you went past the time, and we said, oh, we acknowledge the fact, yes, that's legitimate, then we would release that deduction, and you would get paid all that money back. But if it turns out that no, you were responsible for going over the time limit, then that would be a permanent deduction. And they could be steep. They could be thousands of dollars per calendar day, depending on the size of the contract. So it's very important that you stay on time. And if you're a subcontractor, it's actually the prime contractor that, it gets the money deducted, but they will pass on that deduction to the subcontractor. So anyway, it's very important to stay on time and stay in progress.
Thank you, Dave. We do have one more question from Dolene. It says, what specifically are truckers responsible for?
Truckers? I'm not quite sure what that means. What are truckers responsible for? Could they be more specific?
Sure. Dolene, I'm going to actually unmute you to see if you can elaborate a little bit more. Hi, Dolene.
Okay, good morning. Thank you. I would like to know, so you had mentioned that if a contractor damages, under the liquid damages part, or the asphalt, if the asphalt is ordered by the prime and it's not correct, that cost would pass down to the truckers?
No, I don't know. No, what I'm talking about is compaction of the asphalt. We have a specification. Normally, our asphalt compaction is required to be a minimum 95%. And if it is less than that, but it's, I believe, more than 90%, we can accept the asphalt, but take not a very large deduction in the payment for that item. So I can't imagine why that would be the responsibility of the trucker. It would be the responsibility of the contractor that is actually placing and compacting the asphalt. As far as liquidated damages, it's not really related to surveying. What I was talking about was if Surveys puts out a survey stake, which they will do for free to the contractor the first time, if that stake gets damaged, then and the contractor needs it again and needs surveys to go out a second time to place that stake, we will charge the contractor for that, and that would be a permanent deduction. Does that answer your question?
Dolene said thank you. Thanks, Dave. I believe that is all the questions we have at this moment. So I would like to introduce our next speaker, Monica Corralejo, our labor compliance manager, who will be discussing contractor responsibilities. Hi, Monica.
Hi, Maisel. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Monica Corralejo. I'm the labor compliance manager for District 11, and I'm going to talk about additional contractor responsibilities. So we'll start with some of the basic ones. As a contractor and subcontractor working on our public works projects, there's many responsibilities, but we're just going to hone in on a few. First of all, if you want to work or bid on one of our projects, you must be registered with the Department of Industrial Relations. You must follow apprenticeship requirements. You must pay prevailing wages, and you must maintain and submit certified payrolls. Now, in the next few slides, we're going to go into a little more detail with some of these, so we'll continue on. Thank you. Okay, the labor code was changed, or there was a new law passed a few years ago that established a new public works contractor registration with the Department of Industrial Relations. What that means is that contractors who want to work and bid on our contract must register and pay an annual fee of $400 in order to work and bid on our projects. That fee is paid on a yearly basis, or if you can also pay it 3 years at a time. So this was, if you worked on our projects maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and you haven't been doing any business with us for a while, or in the state of California on any public works project, this is a new registration. This is a new requirement, it's a new fee. So there's very few exceptions in terms of who is required to be registered. Therefore, I would suggest to just pay the fee. If you're not sure if it applies to you, it probably does apply to you if you're going to perform any type of work on the contract. And once again, there's a very little gray area in terms of who is required to be registered. So I would just suggest that you just be registered. As a matter of fact, there are some prime contractors that probably don't even consider you if they know that you are not registered, because there are penalties for the hiring, for the contractor or subcontractor, for the hiring entity and the awarding body that have employed a company to work on a public works project who is not registered. So everybody's interested in making sure that we hire registered contractors. And like Dave Pounds said earlier, this is one of the instances where a penalty that is assessed on an agency may be passed on to others below. So very important to register. Thank you. We'll go on to the next slide. Okay, another component of a public works project is the payment of prevailing wages. All workers employed on public works projects must be paid prevailing wages determined by the Department of Industrial Relations and the United States Secretary of Labor when the project has federal funds. The payment must be made based on the type of work and location of the project. Prevailing wage rates are usually based on rates specified in collective bargaining agreements. So without going into a lot of detail, prevailing wages are what the employees on public works projects must get paid, and we get those rates directly from what the Department of Industrial Relations, DIR, now what they publish twice a year, and also the Department of Labor. So we basically, everybody goes to this one area and they look for those rates. The rates are based on union agreements, because those union agreements, generally speaking, are the rates that are prevailing in the geographic area. But we do not enforce union rates. We enforce the rates that are published by the DIR and the DOL. So it's very important as a subcontractor, if you are employing anybody working on a public works project, it's very important that you are familiar with those rates, that you are familiar with those websites. So we'll go on to the next slide, and it'll give us a little more information. Payment of prevailing wages. Contractors must pay employees based on the type of work performed, not union affiliation, or the rates that you are accustomed to pay their employees elsewhere, most likely when they're doing private work. Contractors should be familiar with the scope and the rates of each prevailing wage determination. The Caltrans and other awarding bodies provide free training throughout the year. So I would encourage you as contractors who are not familiar with prevailing wages to go to one or more seminars when they become available. You will learn a lot of information. The awarding bodies provide training. Third parties provide training. The Association of Government Contractors also provide training. Some of the training is free. Some of the training you may have to pay, but it's a lot of useful information, but it will help you to make sure that you follow all the rules and regulations. So I'll continue on this slide. Overtime, maybe, thank you. No, you know what, we can move on. That's fine. We'll move on to the next one. Thank you. Okay, so as part of your requirements for paying prevailing rates, there are forms associated that you must submit. Some of them are listed here, such as a fringe benefits statement, a contractor weekly certified payroll, and we call them certified payroll because you, as the hiring entity or the employer of the employees or the workers, must certify under penalty of perjury that the information is true and correct, and you must certify on a statement of compliance. You see here Form CEM 2503. You can use your own forms You don't have to use the forms that we have listed here, as long as your forms comply with all the requirements of our forms. In addition, other types of forms that you will be required to submit are apprenticeship certificates issued by the Department of Industrial Relations, Apprenticeship Division, and if a project has federal funds, you will also be required to submit apprenticeship certificates issued by the Department of Labor. In addition, you may be required to submit proof of training contributions, which are a component of the prevailing rates that you pay employees. You will also be required to submit employee deduction authorizations. Now, these are just some of the basic forms that we require when you submit certified payroll and to show proof of payment. But there are other forms that we may ask you to submit. These are just some of the payments. Some of the forms. And see. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so what happens, number one, if you don't pay the employees correctly, or you don't pay them at all, or you don't pay them based on the type of work performed or the geographic area, or you don't submit the forms on time. So here it is. It's spelled out, generally speaking, in the California Labor Code. And it says, basically the first bullet says that you must submit the payroll to us, to Caltrans, by the 15th of the month for any work performed the previous month. And if you do not submit the payroll to us, then we can withhold temporarily, we can withhold up to $10,000 per month for failure to submit the certified payrolls. And we do subject the primes to this withhold, and the primes may pass on that part of that withhold to their subcontractors who fail to submit the documents. Other codes, if you fail to pay the employees correctly, we can withhold progress payment until we rectify the issue and make sure the employees are made whole. And also, if you fail to submit the documents for an unspecified period of time, if you don't submit them on time, we can impose penalties under California Code Section 1776H. And once again, those penalties can add up. Even if you have paid your employees correctly, if it takes you a really long time to submit those documents to us, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, we can try to add penalties for failure to meet the requirement, $100 per day per worker. And so if you have 10 workers working each day, and now it's been 3 months since you've submitted a payroll, those penalties add up. And these are penalties that usually start off as being temporary, but they could turn into permanent deductions. Just letting you know, these are some of the withholds associated with labor compliance that we take from the prime contractor, and the prime contractor can pass those withholds to their subcontractors. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so moving, kind of changing the subject a little bit, is that last year, 2020, our labor compliance program in Caltrans moved into the 21st century and began using a web-based certified payroll system for the submission of all certified payroll documents. So up to 2020, everybody was required to submit what I call paper payroll. The contractor printed out a payroll, submitted it to the prime submitted the paper payroll to the awarding body, Caltrans in this case. But as of 2020, we started requiring contractors to use this web-based system, and now these subcontractors will upload the payroll directly into this web-based system. The system works with various reporting, payroll reporting systems. It doesn't work for all, but there are workarounds if your program doesn't work with the our web-based payroll system. There is no charge for contractors to use the system. Caltrans is the one paying the vendor to maintain the web-based system, and because it's a contractual obligation, the contractors must use the web-based system. It is not an option. It is written into the contract that contractors must submit all payrolls, and the documents, some of the forms that I mentioned earlier, must go through that system. Right now, the system that we are using is called LCP Tracker. I'm sure in San Diego, I know a lot of contractors are already familiar with the program. It is called LCP Tracker. So just know that we're using LCP Tracker, a web-based system. In the future, it could be a different system, but for the foreseeable future, we will be using LCP Tracker. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so with the last slide, that concluded basically what I call the labor compliance prevailing wage portion of the my presentation. But now I'm going to move on to other contractual obligations that are separate from labor compliance. At least that's how I consider it. And they involve various types of contractual subcontracting obligations. And one of them, especially specific to the state of California, specific to doing work on a public works project in the state of California, is the Subletting and Subcontracting Fair Practices Act, which requires prime contractors to list at time of bid subcontractors who will perform in excess of 0.5% of the total bid, or $10,000, whichever is greater. The prime must use the subcontractors as listed at time of bid unless a written substitution is requested and approved in writing by the resident engineer before the substitution. So what that means, in my own terms, is that at time of bid, the prime lists the subcontractors that meet that threshold, whatever threshold that is. It depends on the prime's own overall bid. They will list the subcontractors, and Caltrans will hold the prime accountable, will make sure that the subcontractors that they listed at time of bid who meet that criteria are used throughout the project, through the life of the construction project. If they do not follow the protocols, then the prime may be subject to withhold, which, depending on the circumstances, may be passed on to the lower tier subcontractors. The other thing you must know is that the subcontractors that are listed on those forms have certain protections from being removed from the project unless the prime follows the protocol. I think that's about it on that slide. Thank you. Another form of subcontracting falls under federal requirement. It's called a Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, DBE, and we know that we have at least one DBE with us. I think that was Rodney. And so once again, this becomes a contractual obligation between the prime and Caltrans, and very similar to the subcontracting and subletting portion. The prime at time of bid lists certain disadvantaged business enterprise DBEs to be used on the project, and Caltrans will hold the prime accountable to make sure that they use those DBEs. But in addition to making sure that they use the DBEs, the primes have to ensure that the DBEs perform a commercially useful function. And a commercially useful function means that the subcontractor, vendor, or trucking firm is responsible for performing, managing, and supervising the portion of the work that they're responsible for. So if we find out, or somebody finds out, that the DBE is not performing a commercially useful function, that could affect the prime, and Caltrans may withhold money in order to meet the DBE commitment that they listed at the time of bid. So let's see. Compliance with the Subletting and Subcontracting Fair Practices Act applies to all listed DBE subcontractors. Contractors must ensure that the listed DBE performs the items work specified. If a prime contractor fails to achieve commitment DBE participation, the dollar value of the proposed DBE participation to date will be withheld from payment. Prime contractors must submit a request for substitution in writing, citing one of the reasons listed in the contract. A DBE must be replaced with another DBE, or the prime must perform good faith efforts to replace the DBE. If a DBE is replaced without approval or going through the proper protocols, then the prime is subject to the withhold. So once again, in this case, once a prime lists DBEs on the project to perform certain items of work, Caltrans will hold the prime accountable, and the DBEs cannot be removed from the project unless the prime has gone through the proper channels and it goes through the correct substitution process. It is not unheard of for a DBE or a subcontractor to want to remove themselves from the project. That happens sometimes. A scheduling issue comes up, or for other reasons. But I just wanted to let you know that as a DBE, you do have protections. Sometimes the awarding body may change the circumstances or the scope of the project. That may change the DBE participation. But if you are a listed DBE and you're not sure, you can always contact us. And at the end of this presentation, you'll see our contact information. So this is speaking specifically to the contract provision that's required on federally funded projects. And now we're going to move on to the slide that talks about disabled veteran business enterprises. So when our projects do not have federal funds, then usually the default is a disabled veterans business enterprise DBE goal. You will either have a DBE goal or a DVB goal. You won't have both, and they are not interchangeable. Very important to know that. And let's see, it says all DVBEs must perform, once again, a commercially useful function. And this is as defined from the Military and Veterans Code to count for contract participation. Once again, if the DVBE does not perform a commercially useful function, that could affect the payment that Caltrans makes to the prime. If a substitution is needed, the DVBE must be replaced with another DVBE, and the prime must notify the awarding body of the intent to substitute. And once again, they have to follow the protocol. They're all the ones that I've mentioned so far, they're very similar to each other, subcontracting, DBE, and DVBE. They have slight nuances. Just know that it's a little different for all. And let's see, for the DVBE program, the ultimate, if there is a substitution request, the ultimate approval comes from another department, the Department of DGS, which is Department of General Services. That actually, the approval for substitution request does not fall on Caltrans to make the approval. It comes with the DGS. Okay, so and let's go on to the next slide. Thank you, Maisel. So I've kind of already mentioned that there are consequences for a prime to not for not following their contractual obligations, and it's kind of laid out here. Failure to comply with the requirements of the Subletting and Subcontracting Fair Practices Act may result in a penalty of up to 10% of the subcontract involved, if you were talking about the Subletting Act. In regards to the DBE, what does it say here? Unless the department authorizes a request to terminate or substitute a listed DBE, the department does not pay for work unless it is performed or supplied by the DBE listed on the DBE commitment form. You may be subject to other sanctions under the Code of Federal Regulations. And for DVBEs, if you fail to use a listed DVB without any authorized substitution, the department issues a penalty up to 10% of the dollar amount of the work. So most of these sanctions, Caltrans would apply to the prime, but it could be passed on to the sub if for various reasons. But usually, since our contract is with the prime, then we hold the prime accountable. So I believe that concludes part of my presentation. The last thing you should know is that if you feel that you have not been paid on time, it's been a while, the way that you have, it's been a while since you've been paid, you can file a stop notice against the contract. And we have the links there for you. The lady that actually processes the contracts in our accounting division in headquarters has allowed us to publish her direct email, and Maisel just put it up there for everybody. What that means, if you have any questions, or if you want to file a stop notice, or if you want the forms themselves, we have a link to those. You can also send them directly to Catherine Oda. And the most important thing that you should know about this, Caltrans is a very large department, and we have a lot of functional units, a lot of addresses. We are in San Diego District 11. The most important thing is that if you have a stop notice or you want to file a stop notice, I strongly recommend that you send it directly to Catherine Oda, because if you send an address that you have on file, if you have an address that you've been using to submit bids, or you have an address for the resident engineer, if you send your stop notice request to one of those addresses and not directly to Catherine Oda or not directly to the address listed on the form itself, it may take a while for that form to get up to headquarters. And that could mean the difference on whether the department will be able to hold the money that needs to be held. So if you remember anything regarding this slide, is make sure that number one, you send it directly to Catherine Oda. You can send it by email, obviously, or on the form itself, the address is listed there. Make sure that it goes up there. When we get the forms in another area, we definitely try to send it up to headquarters accounting, but not everybody knows what a stop notice is, and may not recognize what you're sending if you're sending it to the wrong address. So I said a lot, and that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, we'll take them now. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. We do have a couple questions. Our first question comes from Barbara. Does prevailing wage apply to subcontracted security guard services?
That's a very good question. Security guard, and I can't remember the security guard, generally speaking, is exempt. If it's in a recurring nature, so I haven't gotten that question in a long time, but it's pretty much exempt. And I wish right now I could remember the code. where that information is from. But generally speaking, no, it is not. There is no prevailing wage for security guards.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Monica. We also do have another question from Dan. He wishes to speak this verbally because it's a little more elaborate. So I am going to unmute him right now. Dan?
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Hi. I actually have 4 questions, so I'll just kind of shoot them off. First off, when bidding as a prime, if one of the subcontractors that is used after we are awarded the contract indicates that this project is above their capability, they're a small company, and they cannot fulfill, what is the prime responsibility? Can we swap them out? What happens?
I'm going to assume that the subcontractor is just a subcontractor and you listed them because they met the subcontracting threshold based on that slide that I told you. Then you have to follow the substitution process, and the substitution process and the reasons for substitution are literally spelled out in the Subcontracting and Subletting Fair Practices Act, Public Contract Code 4100 to 4114. So I would recommend that you actually do what I do all the time. I have a question, I don't know the answer. Let me Google that. So Google what I just said, California Public Contract Code, section 4100 to 4114, and the guidelines for substituting a listed contractor are spelled out there. Those are the same guidelines that we use to determine if we can if we can allow a prime contractor to substitute a listed contractor, and it gives the reasons for doing so, and you know, the follow-up that we have to do. So that's my best advice to you. The first thing is, number one, I do see contractors who erroneously list subcontractors who don't meet the subcontracting threshold. So they would have the protection. So number one, if you listed them, I'm assuming you listed them because they meet the subcontracting threshold. If it was a mistake, then we wouldn't go through the protocol. But that's number one. So does that answer your first question?
I believe so.
Thank you.
And the second question is, if there is a listed subcontractor and they in turn use a second-tier subcontractor to perform some of the work or all of the work, that the second-tier subcontractor, you know, the first-tier subcontractor, you know, provided a bid. They didn't provide details of their subcontractor. Is that a pretty straightforward way for them to you know, perform the work, that they can select whoever they want to perform the work?
Generally speaking, yes. The first-tier subcontractor must perform the industry standard of the work. They can't just basically give up. You as a prime are still responsible to make sure that your own staff performs a substantial portion of the work. And I believe I think the standard is about 30%, the same thing that we hold the prime accountable for. So basically, you don't quote me on that. I believe it's 30%. But in whatever the industry is, basically, you don't want the second tier to perform all the work, and the first tier is just there in name. But it is not uncommon. Okay. It's actually very common for other tier, your first tier to hire other tiers. And the prime can probably speak to that a little later in her presentation.
Dan, just for the sake of time's sake, if you can submit your additional questions to me directly, and I can send it to Monica for follow-up, so that way we can have one more question addressed from another attendee, and we can continue on with the presentation. So thank you, Dan. And we have one last question from Rodney, Monica. It says, can a DBE supplier use the stop notice?
Yes. Anybody, yes. The stop notices are for anybody that feels that they are not paid on time. Usually a company, an entity, a stop notice is not the appropriate place for an employee who feels they weren't paid on time. That you would have to contact the district labor compliance office for that. But yes, vendors, suppliers, any type of firm that perform work for somebody else, yes, can submit their stop notice. And if you're, yes, so I'm just going to leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Monica, for your presentation. I will go ahead and introduce our last presenter. It's Tamara Jelenas from agency contractor Granite Construction, and she'll be talking to you about a little bit of tips from the prime. Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you, Maysel. I'm really glad to be here with all of you today. So I'm here to provide you with some tips on receiving timely payment from the perspective of a prime contractor. So let's start off with a high-level points from the actual statute for prompt payment. A prime contractor's legal basis for withholding a portion or all of a subcontractor's progress payment is derived from the statute Business and Professions Code 7108.5. First, to qualify for California's prompt payment laws, the subcontractor must provide a proper invoice. So we'll touch a little bit more on what defines a proper invoice in a later slide, but in short, it needs to be accurate and timely. Two exceptions to the 7-day delivery of progress payments by the prime contractor to a subcontractor are the following. Number one, unless otherwise agreed to in writing. This is typically something that would be discussed during the contract negotiation process prior to start of work on the project. This has to be an executed agreement. It cannot be a handshake or verbal agreement with, say, somebody like the project manager or project engineer on site. It needs to be something in writing that can be referenced at any point and is mutually agreed upon. Number two, prime contractor may withhold from a progress payment 150% of the specific amount otherwise due over which it has a good faith dispute. So let's go to the next slide and learn some examples of what a good faith dispute actually is. So some examples of good faith disputes, or what you could call a reason for which payment is going to be withheld past the statutory deadline of the 7 days, includes the following: unsatisfactory job progress, defective construction work or materials not remedied, disputed work or materials, failure to comply with other material provisions of the construction contract, third-party claims filed or reasonable evidence that a claim will be filed, failure of a subcontractor to make timely payments for labor, equipment, and materials, damage to the owner, and reasonable evidence that the construction contract cannot be completed for the unpaid balance of the construction contract sum. So, in general, if a good faith dispute exists, the prime contractor should provide clear and timely notice to the subcontractor before the actual monies get withheld. Next slide, please. So here's the subcontractor checklist. So most general contractors have a checklist of items that their subs must provide in order to get paid. The requirements may have slight variances amongst the different primes, but this is a list of items that are most commonly required by prime contractors of the subs to get paid within the 7-day statutory deadline. So hang in there with me as we go through this list. I know may be overwhelming for some of you, but these are standard items that are throughout the industry, and they'll become very familiar to you if they aren't already. But before we dive in, I want to touch on one point. I do recommend, to make it easier on you, that the time you're informed that you've been selected to perform work for a specific project, ask for a project contact list. So for Granite, that would include people such as the project manager, project engineer, subcontract admin, accounts payable, payroll admin, people like that. This will ensure that you have the correct point of contact to assist you in timely completion of these items and ultimately, and most importantly, timely payment. So let's dive in here. So number one, a fully executed subcontract on file. Number two, performance and payment bonds executed and on file. Number three, up-to-date insurance on file, not to expire within 30 days of payment. Number four, up-to-date contractor's license and in good standing. Number five, up-to-date DIR number. So number 1 through 5 of this list would ideally be completed before you even start work on the project. These are things that we check for before we clear somebody to go on site. So let's go to number 6. An invoice that matches the quantities for the month that Caltrans is paying. A couple items off of that. Subs often try to bill through the end of the month versus the 20th of the month. And other subs ignore what Caltrans is paying and bill what they want. So this is a little bit more detail on the accurate and timely invoice that we talked about earlier. And as Margie detailed, making sure that subs bill through the appropriate work performed through dates and submit those quantities to the prime with enough time for review before the prime is obligated to submit the quantities to the owner or the entity, in this case Caltrans, that they are working for. That's really important that we have enough time to process so that all the quantities stay in line and payment gets generated accordingly. So let's go to the next slide. Number 7, conditional releases to match invoice and conditional releases from all subs and suppliers. These are standard forms that will state a specific amount owed to the sub for a specific billing period. Obviously, these will be required for all of your subs and suppliers as well. Number 8, unconditional releases for the previous month's payment from all subs and suppliers. This is just showing that you've been paid for the previous billing period before receiving payment for the next period or the next month. Again, required for all of your subs and suppliers. Number 9, certified payroll for subcontractor, for second-tier subcontractors, concrete suppliers, owner-operated trucking, union status letters, or trust fund letters as applicable. So these are standard payroll requirements like we already heard about, documents that will be uploaded into LCP Tracker. Union status letters are on this list because those are also typically uploaded into LCP Tracker, and those will just let us know that you're in good standing with any union that you are signatory to. So number 10, money is withheld for any stop notice falsely filed. So in short, a falsely filed stop notice would be one with inflation of the stop notice amount that would be in excess of the value of the work actually performed. We typically don't see that too often. So moving on to number 11, documentation of compliance with skilled and trained contract provisions in some cases, DBE utilization forms, apprentice utilization. Those are things that have been talked about before, general standard documents that are at times required depending on the specifications of a particular project. So that concludes my section. Thank you all for your attention as we work through these crucial tips. Hope it aids you in receiving timely payment. I would now like to open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Tamara. I did have one question from Martin, and I wasn't sure if this was more of a statement or a question directly to you. So in that case, Martin, I am going to unmute you. Go ahead, Martin.
Hi, Josh. We are the material supplier, and we are working on one project right now. I just wonder how fast you will get paid. Your standard terms like 45 days. We are DGS, so micro business, and you're going to supply top. If you win the bid, then how fast you want to get paid?
So, that's kind of specific to your contract and the situation. But again, prompt payment laws say that as a prime, we would pay the sub. Sounds like you may be, I don't know if you're supplying directly to the sub themselves or to the prime. But again, once the prime gets paid, they would turn around within 7 days, pay their sub, and the same thing, they would turn around and get you paid. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Tamara. I don't believe that there is any other I always speak too soon. So I have a question from Ruben. Can a prime contractor require an unconditional release from a subcontractor's supplier to pay a progress payment?
Absolutely. Yeah, and typically you would see that in your contract, any requirements from your suppliers and lower tier subs. But yes, I can tell you for Granite, it is standard practice. Anytime you receive a prelim or are aware of somebody performing work on site or supplying material for that project, we will require an unconditional release.
Okay, and I do have another question. Are subs able to file a mechanics lien for Caltrans projects?
Typically, it would be a stop notice because it's a public project. Mechanics liens are typically seen on private work. It acts the same way as a stop notice. So in this case, you would issue a stop notice.
Okay, perfect. And I think Rodney has a question that he wants to address verbally. So Rodney, go ahead.
Okay. Like I said, I've worked on some Caltrans projects in the past, and I did work on a project in which Granite was the general contractor on that project. And we were sent out a legal DBE form. What happened, we had submitted our invoice, but we didn't get the legal DBE form until like on the 20th or the 26th or something like that. Is there a tip for us to make sure that we get or when we should get our invoice in to make sure that we get paid within that month?
Yeah, I mean, as you heard, the cutoff is the 20th. Typically, I would say you want to get it in before the 15th into Granite so that we have time to review it with you and we can add it into our quantities that we then discuss with Caltrans before the deadline. Secondly, and I touched on this before, I would say that anything, that you have questions on, that's where that list of contacts comes in. You may want to be directed to that correct person for a timely answer and timely payment.
Thank you, Tamara. There is one more question. I'm not sure if this pertains to your section, but does the prompt payment stamp still exist for small businesses? I'm not sure what that means.
I'm not sure either.
Okay. Okay, Dan, I am going to unmute you real quick if you just want to elaborate as to what that question is.
I'm in the meetings right here. You can still go
Dan.
to the old...
I'm sorry?
I wasn't sure if you wanted to clarify what your question is for the prompt payment stamp.
Yeah, so we used to have a prompt payment stamp for small businesses that we would stamp our invoices and supposedly they would be processed within a immediate time frame. Does that still exist? Is that still an option?
I am not familiar with that. No, I mean, the prompt payment applies to everybody and, we process invoices accordingly unless contractually there's a different pay term that says otherwise, which we have seen before. Maybe you have a net 30, net 45 type pay term that we would go off of in certain situations, but otherwise it's the standard, pay when paid within 7 days of receiving payment from the owner.
All right. Thank you, Tamara. Those are all the questions we have at this moment. So we'll go ahead and bring back Maria to share a little bit more of some additional resources for you all.
Thank you, Maisel. Thank you, Tamara, and all our presenters today. Thank you so much. We hope that the information from today's presentation benefited everyone. There are a few more additional resources. You've seen Maisel send the links out in the chat box, so please take a moment to save those links. You can actually copy and paste it in a Word document so you have it all from the chat box. But I'd like to share with you, before we close out today's session, a few more slides. And this presentation will be available to you subsequent to our event. But this first slide right here is the map. On the right-hand side of the slide shows you the various labor compliance managers by region. So for District 11, you've heard from Monica Corralejo. Her contact information is provided on the screen for your convenience. And for any labor compliance related inquiries, Monica would be your greatest resource here at the district. And of course, our small business team, any small business related questions or any questions you feel remain unanswered through today's presentation, please contact our team, Small Business Unit, at d11.smallbusiness@dot.ca.gov. And you can also leave us a message. So today's presentation was compiled from various resources. Therefore, we've created 3 full slides of useful website links for you to explore at your leisure. Again, this presentation along with the recording will be available to you, hopefully within the next day or so. So as Amer had mentioned in the beginning of our presentation, Caltrans values your input and feedback. Therefore, we would love to hear your feedback as to how we can further improve our future events. So please complete a 1-minute survey that will be prompted as soon as you exit the session. This includes any suggestions on a preferred topic for our future How to Do Business 2.0 series. And again, if you have any further questions or would like to have an opportunity to meet with our small business team on one-on-one, you may contact us at our email as shown on the screen. Again, d11.smallbusiness@dot.ca.gov. Thank you, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful day.